Hello and welcome to the 1916 podcast. I'm Tim Mosso here with Armand Johnston. I want to remind you that this is an interactive feature, so if you have questions or comments or themes for shows, please send them to podcasts at the1916company.com. Today, we are discussing Audemars Piguet Beyond the Royal Oak, but before we do, we want to confirm that this is an interactive program. We had a question about how we feel about Karl F. Bucherer, not the retailer, the brand. So, Armand, how do we feel about these watches?
You know, first and foremost, I find it absolutely remarkable that up until 2023, it was one of the older family-held companies. You know, an independent, the original family directly associated with the brand, and I think that's amazing. I think that's fantastic. I would love to know the weight of the decision it was to sell.
So, also worth mentioning is that Karl F. Bucherer is the watch brand label name for a line of watches sponsored by Bucherer, which is a large retailer. Now, they're not one and the same. There are Karl F. Bucherer watches that are floating around in the ether for sale pre-owned. And of course, they're a house brand, but they're a relatively new one as well. Karl F. Bucherer is really only 23 years old, even though the company itself dates to 1888. The original Bucherer retailer is very distinct from the modern 21st century brand name. In the 20th century, Bucherer watches were made and they were branded, but they were not produced by Bucherer. They were all white label. There were multiple manufacturers. There was even a Beta 21. I digress. In the modern era, the success of Karl F. Bucherer as a brand was primarily driven by CEO Sasha Mori, who established a number of model lines like Monero, Petravi, built it up, and invested heavily in watchmaking, including the purchase of F. P. Journe's old company, THA. And so there's a lot of investment really over the last 2 decades. Mori left in 2022, but it takes a long time to produce new watches and even longer to produce new movements. So for now, it still has a lot of his imprint on it. And I'm going to maybe throw a fly in the ointment here when I say that a lot of the watches were built with an Eastern European audience in mind. When I met Mori at Baselworld 2016, they had a colossal multi-story building within a building in the main hall, and he showed me a $400,000 crystal business card holder, and he said, this is for the Russian market. A lot of what we do is for the Russian market. So if it seems like Bucherer watches are all really big, think Ulysse Nardin circa 2005, and you're not far off. These watches were built to suit an Eastern European perspective on what luxury could be and should be. As a result, a lot of them are really, really big. But from a mechanical standpoint, what I've always found interesting are their peripheral rotor automatics. So the A1000 and the A2000, and again, this is from the THA purchase, when they bought a company originally founded by F. P. Journe and Denis Flageolet in the 2000s, they brought it in-house and started turning out their own movements for the first time. The peripheral rotors, especially the A1000, are really impressive. That was a cost, no object movement, and so much so that I feel like it was probably heavily subsidized and might have even lost a lot of money out of the gate. And that's why the A2000 came out in 2016. Try to create a version of this that we can actually make money on. So if you find an A1000 watch and your wrist is big enough to wear it, I say fantastic. Now, they do make calendars, perpetual calendars, chronograph perpetual calendars. They do make tourbillon watches. All of these things have merit. But if there's one piece of criticism I could kind of throw at the brand, it's that the individual model lines can be attractive, but it doesn't seem like design-wise or ethos-wise there's anything to tie all these watches together. It's almost like, you know, the house brand at Tourneau or something like that.
I find it amazing that they did pair their peripheral rotor with big complications too, such as their tourbillon minute repeater, for example. I think that's an awesome combination. And to your point, the peripheral rotor is an amazing winding mechanism in itself. It's very cool to see. It doesn't obstruct the movement in any way, and it's just It's just different.
Yeah, definitely a brand where I would say you kind of take it the way you take like the Tourneau House brand or watches that are labeled Tiffany. You find one you really love and you devote yourself to the model. I don't think there are a whole lot of really committed Karl F. Bucherer mono brand collectors out there. And that's just because, unlike, say, a Lange und Söhne, which has a really effective continuity from model to model, even if they're not identical, you know they're all Lange. I don't get that from Bucherer. I get the sense that these things were designed by a revolving cast of characters through the years in the design department, and I think this is a brand that's still searching for its soul, a little bit like the pre-Octo Bulgari.
Some of the releases do feel a bit, let's meet quarterly numbers, let's sell some watches type deal.
I would say find one you love and then just, stick to that. I think on a dive watch front, the Petravi Scuba Tech's really nice. If you can wear a 44.5 millimeter diver, it's probably one of the best, simple customer caliber divers out there for quality, for features, for the way it looks and feels more expensive than it is. I think there's a lot of value in that, despite the fact that it's almost an entry-level watch for them. I don't think you need to go and buy one of the perpetual calendars or the Tourbillon. I think that's a really cool watch that could easily be seen as like a budget sea dweller. So
it's funny, actually. I do find the Petravi Scuba Tech kind of UN adjacent to a certain degree.
I would say that's
earlier.
A marine diver, maxi marine diver, absolutely.
Yep. Through bracelet and all, kind of two-tone bezel on some of the models, large oversized handset, very diver as well, but also extremely maxi marine.
A lot to love, I think 500-meter diver, helium escape valve, fantastic bracelet with incredible extension system, feels really robust, ceramic capped bezel, COSC chronometer certification, a design that does not feel generic. That's really their strongest sports offering. The problem is it's probably 2 or 3 millimeters too large for 2024 tastes. And having launched back in 2013, it still has that late 2000s design ethos where, biggest is best. It is thin, though. It is thin for what it is, and I'll give it credit for that. I'd also say stuff like the Monero Power Reserve is neat. You get a day, you get a date, you get a Power Reserve. You get that very cool peripheral rotor. That's a model that came out in 2013. There's been a couple of different versions of it through the years. I've always been very taken by the A1000 caliber, and I think if you find a watch that wears it well, you really got to search a little bit sometimes to find a design you like with the A1000. But I was definitely on board with that, and I thought it was a great addition. A lot of different interesting pieces out there. There's the Monero Tourbillon, which I would say has a lot of appeal, provided, you're ready to... you're probably going to take a bath if you buy that new, so that's something to buy pre-owned. I think that's a clear case where the brand is just not strong enough right now for me to say, yeah, no holds barred, buy with confidence, get it new, and never look back. You do have to worry a little bit about protecting yourself in the same sense that, for the last couple of years, Gerard Perregaux or Ulysse Nardin or Breguet have been brands where the product is sound, but you really have to protect yourself given the aftermarket.
And in that regard, I will give them a bit of a credit and say that their entry level is not outrageous price point wise. It's it looks like the entry level Monero is roughly $4,400, $4,900 on a bracelet. You can get a flyback chrono for under $8,000. There are some more inexpensive options, and I do appreciate that from a brand.
Yeah, I would say the tough thing there is that, again, they're trying to be everything to everyone.
I completely agree, and there's quite a few brands that are having similar reactions to the market, I should say.
I'd say if you want a nice piece, go out and find yourself the Karl F. Bucherer Monero Peripheral Blue, a watch that came out in 2016 for 2017 model year. Really nice piece, a peripheral rotor, 55-hour reserve, chronometer certified, a really good-looking watch that's thin like a manual because of the peripheral rotor and not too big at 40.6. I think after 2014, every brand that was designing for the Russian market began to take post-Crimea sanctions into account and started trying to broaden its appeal. And I think you saw that with Ulysse Nardin, and you saw that with Karl F. Bucherer. So post-2014, the watches get a lot more chaste design-wise and also compact dimension-wise. So that's sort of where we are on that. You can continue your adventure online and research the brand. Check out its website. Of course, now all the Tourneaus in the U.S. are Bucherer, or they're slowly becoming Bucherer. You should have more opportunities to see these watches in person. So, today we discuss a matter that is difficult to penetrate because it's hard to see the Audemars Piguet beyond the Royal Oak, especially from the perspective of 2024. Armand, we're talking about our favorites. Why don't you lead off here? We're talking about Royal Oak free Audemars Piguet content today, so we're not going to go there.
This is among my favorite discussion in the Audemars catalog. So my personal favorite outside of Royal Oak, well, this is a two-parter for me. So I'll start with a watch that I've mentioned before on the podcast, and that's the Jules Audemars Chronograph Grand Stade Limited Edition. I think the watch is absolutely amazing. It is a titanium case on a very cool sporty strap with a very race-oriented multi-dimensional dial, and that watch just screams out to me. I think the previous generation of the Jules Audemars Chrono is a very close second to that. Those can be had in the $10,000 to $15,000 range in precious metal. And my brand new favorite, I will say though, the prototype automatic tourbillon hammer rotor, absolutely drop dead amazing. And we were talking a little bit before we started recording. To your point, Tim, it is kind of like a bare bones scratch prototype. It's absolutely thrilling to see a piece like that.
Yeah, that was an interesting watch. A lot of important people involved in the creation of the original Tourbillon Automatique. For those keeping score, we're talking about Audemars Piguet reference 25643. And it came out in 1986, and a trickle of them kept coming out through the late 1990s. It was a revolutionary caliber. I believe it was 2570. Maurice Grimm worked on the caliber. Jacqueline Demier, who was the lead designer and basically design chief of Audemars Piguet for a quarter century, she designed the aesthetics of it. It had a strong Egyptian revival vibe with sun ray on the dial, radiating out from the tourbillon aperture, which sat up at what would be conventionally, I guess, about 11 o'clock on a regular watch dial. This is a vertical rectangle, so if you're trying to imagine it, think Vendôme-style hinge lugs and a vertically oriented rectangle, and you've got the right idea. Almost like a Patek Philippe golden ellipse with a tourbillon up in the upper left-hand corner. Now, the tourbillon on the dial side in 1986 was still a very new thing. This was the era when most watches that had ever been built with the tourbillon, whether pocket or wrist, featured the tourbillon on the back. It was also a breakthrough as an automatic winding tourbillon made in series. That was a first. And he used a platinum iridium striker, a bumper automatic movement, with a little window to see part of it on the dial side. And it took advantage of a lot of the work that had been done in the late 70s and early 80s, moving towards ultra-thin watches, including quartz ultra-thin watches. The idea of building a thin watch into the case back was, at the time, considered to be cutting edge and very fresh. So this watch, although it's very small at 27.8 by 32.8, it's only 5.4 millimeters thick with an automatic tourbillon. They made somewhere around 400 of them with about, 5% in platinum, so most in yellow gold.
The size of that alone blows me away, just because when you discuss the tourbillon itself, you're talking about a pinky nail sized tourbillon, something that's extremely small. It's micro in comparison to some of today's tourbillon.
Yeah, it's very, very small, and I believe it was the first tourbillon carriage to use titanium, and that was in order to give the watch a reasonable power reserve, because the bumper automatic was not terribly efficient, and there wasn't a lot of room for the barrel, but because of the lightness of the tourbillon, they managed to get 50 hours of power reserve out of this, which was a real triumph. It was also one of the first watches to have a thoroughly themed boxed set, and Jacqueline Demier designed this too. And if the watch was obliquely kind of Egyptian revival inspired, the box was fully committed. That's why this watch is sometimes called the Ra, because Egyptian mythology and iconography are heavily depicted on the boxed set for this watch. Okay, so on Chrono, they're going for between about 45 and 60,000. Just to let you know how the market for this is developed, I once had an option to buy this for 20 grand. That was back in 2013. At the time, that was more money than I had to spend on a watch, but it just gives you an idea. Look, inflation, whatever, that's real value gained. That's a watch that's more than doubled in price in the space of a decade. So that's an upwardly mobile watch, and I think the only thing holding it back is a combination of small size and obscurity.
Now, in terms of In terms of something a little bit more modern, I'm very, very curious on your opinions on the remaster.
Which one?
Well, the remaster in general. So,
Okay.
the remaster one is a personal favorite of mine. I adore the watch. I think it's, I think it was a bit of a misstep to make it automatic, personally, but I really, really love the remaster one. The remaster two is extremely interesting as well. I think it's too big.
Yeah, it is. It's based on the 1960 reference 5159BA, which is one of those interesting faceted form style watches with a shaped crystal that were very popular at the peak of the career of Gilbert Albert, who had a lot of influence on that front in Switzerland at the time. And I thought the remaster one missed the mark a little bit with the automatic winding, but I guess they're playing to the market. They made kind of a lot of them for a limited edition. Did they make 500 of the remaster one?
And I believe retail was 51,000 at the time, and those trade for anywhere, gosh, I would say high 20s, low 30s right now.
So the new remaster is going to be 250 pieces, and what are they calling this? Sand gold? Is that what they're calling it?
Yeah.
Imagine traditional 18 karat white gold that hasn't been rhodium plated. That's what this looks like.
I have to say, it has a really nice tone to it. I'm dying to see this piece in the metal because I like the light tone to it. It's not, it's very own. It is its very own thing. It's not honey gold. It's not yellow gold. It is something that is just a little bit lighter. It's almost, it's almost Hublot adjacent in their new gold as well.
Yeah, I kind of stick to my insistence that this feels like the kind of white gold that was made in the 80s before it got rhodium plated. Like, have you ever seen a really old, like, white gold fluted bezel that has been worn through the rhodium? The material underneath is almost like the color of German silver on a longa movement, and that's sort of the tone of this. It's like German silver. Yeah. I like the watch. I do want to see how it wears. I think it's cool. I think they gave it the 7121 caliber, which is the movement in the new Royal Oak Jumbo. Would have liked to have seen the old 2121, or I guess in this application be a 2120. It doesn't have a date, does it?
It does not.
Yeah, it's the 7129, which is the exact same movement that you get in the Royal Oak Jumbo now, just without the date. The 7121 is the one with the date. So yeah, cool watch. Do we know what this costs, Armand?
You know what? Let me pull that, actually. I was just trying to pull that right now.
I would say that if you haven't already bought one, it kind of doesn't matter what it costs, because I'm sure these are sold out.
I would bet that they are, definitely.
I would be genuinely shocked if there's someone sitting by a phone at Audemars Piguet. $47,200 is what this costs. I actually don't think that's awful. For a limited run piece that's very interesting, couldn't have been cheap to make, and stands apart from just about anything else they've built since 1960. I like it. I actually think the price is fine.
That's the side of it that I completely agree with. This was not cheap to make, and for a company like Audemars to make effectively a new case in 2024, this is a brand new case. They did not have the tooling for this case. For them to do that for a 250 piece limited edition is amazing. I love an angled crystal like this. It's difficult to achieve well, it's difficult to make look good, and it's difficult to keep sealed. I think they did a knockout job with that.
Yeah, I think a lot of the stuff they've done recently has been actually pretty good on the dress watch side. Like, for example, I really like the Code 1159 Star Wheel.
Love Star Wheel.
I love that watch. Now, that, for those of you not keeping score, the 2019 Code 1159 replaced the Jules Audemars line of dress watches. And there was a lot of controversy based on the dial design of the automatic and the chronograph, but that kind of glossed over my feeling that it was just too big to be a dress watch. It's 41 millimeters, 50 millimeters lug to lug, but I really liked it as a platform for the Star Wheel, a traditional Audemars Piguet complication that was launched in 1991 on the original Star Wheel, and then revisited in 2000 on the Millenary Star Wheel. So the Code 1159 by AP Star Wheel is white gold. It's 41 millimeters. It is automatic winding. It has a dial that's a combination of the Star Wheel carousel and aventurine glass, which I absolutely adore. And so it is a digital time display based on carousels of numerals. It's unlike anything else. It's very AP. It's true to their history. And I think it really helps the Code 1159, if it's still not a dress watch, to at least seem cool.
I've said this before, but I've felt very strongly about Code 1159, and I think they truthfully should have saved it for Realm of the Extraordinary Complications and Grand Comps. So it was originally introduced with the Perpetual Calendar and Aventurine, which is one of my favorite versions of the 1159. I think it's outrageous, it's perfect, but I think they could have skipped time only. I think they could have skipped chronographs, and I think they could have, and again, in my personal opinion, probably should have saved it for your sonories, your weird complications like star wheels, your split seconds, your true grand comps. And had they done that, I believe the line would feel and be perceived as a little bit more special. I also, we talk about Code 1159, but I find more and more few people know what code stands for, and it's an anagram. It stands for Challenge, Overcome, Dare, Evolve, and I'll leave my personal opinions out of that.
My opinion is that is a backronym. They came up with the name, and then they reverse engineered that.
I could not agree more.
They also told me when I went to the launch in 2019 that they called it the 1159 because 11:59 is just before the birth of the new day. And, I raised my hand and asked, well, how do you know it isn't just before lunch?
Both important things.
Yeah, I mean, it could be in the middle of the night, or it could be midday and we're heading off to Wawa to get a sub. I mean, it's not necessarily clear to people which noon you're talking about, midnight or high noon.
I'm challenged, but I'm overcoming to dare the evolution of this hoagie.
And I will say this too, it's a really nice looking watch, that star wheel. The Code 1159 is a big watch, and a star wheel needs kind of a big dial to work, and this works. This is the best Urwerk never made.
One thing I'd like to point out about the case construction of 1159 is that the bottom end of the lugs are floating. And when you're looking at an 1159, a code in general, you can see that it is a multi-piece case, right? You have a bezel, a mid-case, and a case back. However, the lugs are flush with the case back, and hence why they have to be floating and only soldered to the bezel portion of the watch.
That's true. You can take a piece of paper and you can actually insert it between the bottom of the lug and the back of the case, and it's fairly easy to see. But the welding of the lug to the bezel is not easy. There's not a big mating surface, and micro welding parts that fine is a real challenge. So I actually admire that. I also like the ceramic mid-case. Looks absolutely awesome in white gold, black ceramic.
I like the mid-case a lot. I think it's very evocative of AP in the sense of it, it has some Royal Oak in there.
I think if they wanted to explore where to take the code next, I would make it ultra thin and much smaller. Like, see if you can make this in 38 and keep it proportionally, viable. I think that would be a really great time only, 71-21 caliber. If you really want to tug at heartstrings, 21, or just 21-20 without a date.
If they give it the dress watch treatment, and I use the term dress watch loosely, if they give it to make a direct comparison, the 5226G treatment, I think that would be a perfect melding of where 1159 has come from and could go.
Yeah, I think the problem as a dress watch is that it wears like a belt buckle on your wrist. It's just too big for what it is. The Jules Audemars had ultra-thin variants. It had all sorts of different case sizes. The nice thing about a normal round case is that it scales well up and down. I don't know how well this code shape is going to scale, but they should at least give it a shot. Either that, or they should do what you said and just reserve it for exceptional pieces and have something else for your $25,000 to $75,000 dress watch.
And it's not like they even need to create something else. They have the lines available to them. They have the Jules Audemars line, which they could put their chrono complications in. They could put time date movements in very easily. And I don't know, I do believe that would be a hit.
So I totally agree with you right there. I would also say, there's enough that we've said about the code, and I don't want to pile on because everyone has an opinion on the code, and I want this to be an episode about stuff that's not terribly common. So I want to talk about a watch made in the 1980s that was probably the coolest thing you could get in the automatic chronograph space back then. No, I'm not talking about the 88 Cosmograph. I'm talking about the Audemars Piguet 8. The 8 was a automatic winding chrono with a Dubois de Praz module on top of a JLC automatic base. And it's actually well sized at just over 40 millimeters. It's like 40.6. This is a watch that still wears well today. And with a combination of a tantalum case and a rose gold bezel, this thing really pops, and I mean really pops on your wrist. It's something you can go out and buy today for 15 grand in good shape. You've got Holy Trinity, you've got a JLC driver movement, you've got tantalum from one of the very first wristwatch tantalum applications. I can't say for sure AP was the very first with this, but they were certainly the first to build in series. And the 8 more than any tantalum Royal Oak, shows what can be done with the material. I think it's more interesting, especially since the tantalum Royal Oaks tend to be quartz.
They do tantalum very well, and AP is kind of the low-hanging fruit when you think of mixed metal tantalum and X. I think the pairing of tantalum with rose gold is perfect as well, because tantalum does have this blue-gray feeling to it, so the warmth of the rose really balances out the tantalum tone and feel overall. That is just, it's striking. It's contrast. It's complementary. It's a great combination, and you'll see that also in the, to your point with the the quartz Royal Oaks, the Nick Faldo edition.
Yeah, without a doubt, that's a good one to mention. And I think the thing about the 8 that gets me is that at about 40.5 millimeters, it looks very contemporary on the wrist. There aren't a whole lot of 1980s dress watches that still look fresh and properly sized and scaled. You wear that on your wrist, no one's going to guess it's a 30-year-old chronograph. Whereas, if you've got something from the 1980s from any other brand, it's going to be a tiny little thing. And a great example of that would be like a Patek Philippe 3970, where it's both a chronograph and a perpetual calendar, but it's 36 millimeters. That's marked as a vintage product. The 8 still looks really contemporary and fresh. So guys, if you are interested in one of those, and I know many of us are, the reference number to look out for is 25644TR. That's the 8. A really good one's going to set you back $15,000, $16,000.
Now, I have a bit of a transitionary question for you, Tim.
Yeah.
I understand in name that it is. I don't necessarily view the rectangular Royal Oak as a Royal Oak.
I don't either, but then again, we've got a couple of instances of Nautilus that are almost fusions of Nautilus and Ellipse.
Ellipse, yeah.
We've got a rectangular version of the Vacheron 222. We've got a rectangular version of the Royal Oak. And when all three of those watches have both the classic and rectangular facets, like I almost feel like there's a subgenre of watch, the rectangular integrated bracelet early 80s sports watch, like right after the 70s. That seemed to be where they thought design was going, and all three of them went in that direction. So if you can't call that a Royal Oak, is the Vacheron not a 222? Is the Nautilus not a Nautilus? I feel like this is a weird sort of siloed genre that never took off, but it's definitely a thing from a moment in time.
It's a very gray area for me, because I would put so I call it the Nautilips. I would put that in a similar category for the rectangular oak. I think the 222 is a little bit more 222 than not, but for some reason the AP and the Patek kind of stand out as something that's a little bit more their own DNA.
For me, I think they're as much a Royal Oak as a Royal Oak that doesn't have a bracelet. Like, they're Royal Oaks on straps. So these rectangular Royal Oaks and 222s and Nautilus, they still have the integration of the bracelet, whereas the ones on straps, for me, they seem more like the mongrels.
This is why I talk to you. I like that distinction a lot.
So if you like that watch, don't feel bad. It's still a Royal Oak. Okay, so now what I love about Audemars Piguet is that, as with Vacheron and Patek, a substantial amount of its past includes exquisite customer calibers. I don't mean 7750s or 2824s drawn from the mass production lines of ETA and Grenchen. No, things that were created by Jaeger LeCoultre or Victorin Piguet or In some cases, hybrids of JLC and Dubois de Praz if there's a complication on top. So what I always really liked was the Carré Perpetual, a model that went by a couple of different reference numbers in the late 80s and early 90s. And the standard one, the core model without gem setting or anything like that, was the 25749. And it was about 27 millimeters square. And it's sometimes called the Carré Perpetuel because it is a square and a perpetual calendar. And it's got a movement that was originally designed by JLC for Vacheron and AP in the 50s. AP debuted the movement as 2003, back in 1953. Vacheron waited for its 200th anniversary in 1955 before debuting it as the caliber 1003. I believe JLC called this the 802 Abauche, and it was probably the thinnest reliable movement in the world at the time, being manual wind and only 1.65 millimeters thick. And in the early 1990s, it was available as the 25749 in either yellow gold or platinum. And it's a display case back, which was not universal back at that time. The movement is beautiful. And because it is in a square case and it's a round movement, the frame around it, when you view it from the case back, the negative space not filled by a movement is hand engraved. And this is a beautiful little manual wind, ultra thin watch, only about 4 millimeters thick, that has engraving and fine finish and a perpetual calendar and that grand JLC base movement. And for me, this is fantastic. There's also an extravagant 25756 version that is paved with various colored gems and maybe a little bit more exhibitionist than I'm into. But as small as it is, it still has pretty good manners, even in polite company. But I like that core platinum 25749 perpetual calendar Carré, a really special watch. Maybe I should Chrono 24 this and see whether there are any of these kicking around.
You know, that's one thing with off Royal Oak complications. The pricing truthfully doesn't make sense when you compare it to other brands. So, for example, I take Audemars Piguet minute repeaters in the Jules Audemars line. They can be had easily for, I would say now, very low six figures, 100 to 120,000, give or take, and depending possibly even as low as 90. And I think that's outrageous for a Holy Trinity repeater that, in my opinion, is probably only second to Patek.
Yeah, so I'm looking now, what did these actually sell for? And Sotheby's sold one for $13,340. And we are talking Holy Trinity perpetual calendar in precious metal with hand engraving and a JLC ultra thin base. That is a hell of a deal. $13,340 these days. There are some steel dive watches that cost almost that. So 2 thumbs up, a great piece to wear. Just be advised, at 27 by 27, you've got to have a vintage enthusiast's sensibility about how this thing fits because it is going to look fairly small.
I think complication punches a little bit above its size class, to bend a phrase there a little bit, in a great way. There's something extremely romantic about a small perpetual calendar.
And on that note, we have to mention probably the most referenced vintage non-Royal Oak AP of all time, which began life in 1978 as the reference 5548 automatic perpetual, and this was the JLC 2120 base with the Dubois de Praz 2800 module on top, and this watch was a bestseller. It's been chronicled many times that it sold in thousands of copies through the mid-1990s, and in, I want to say, late 1983 for the 1984 model year when AP went to 5-digit reference numbers, it became the 25548. Same lovely watch, a real classic, only about 36 millimeters in diameter. It's not a big watch, but the combination of the ultra-thin automatic with the perpetual calendar was AP restating its commitment to horlogerie at a time when quartz really seemed like the future, even in the prestige space.
The beauty with this, too, is that unlike something like a 3940, the lugs are almost an afterthought. They're very small, they're very, short, and to your point, this will wear at every dimension like a 36, whereas a 3940 also coming in at roughly 36 millimeters, 35 maybe, will wear slightly larger. I also just love the kind of the pseudo stepped case on the 5548.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see that transition. A lot of people ask me, when did AP change to a 5-digit reference number? And I do believe it was late 1983 for the 1984 model year. And it's the same watch, and it's a wonderful piece. And I would say, given its historic importance, it's not that hard to find one, but it can be hard to find a good one. When you've got a small yellow gold vintage dress watch, a lot of them have been polished to death. So look carefully and demand good photos before you buy one of these, because a lot of them have been refinished by people who are butchers. And if you get a really good one, super sharp, never polished, yellow gold, expect to pay around $30,000. And that's very fair for the place this watch occupies in AP history. It was designed by the great Jacqueline Demier, whose signature is all over every AP design from the late 70s through late 1990s. And it's a real landmark piece on every level. Extensively copied. You might say it has a generic look to it. That's not the fault of the watch. It's the fault of every other brand that tried to make a ripoff of it. Where else can we direct our viewers, Armand?
I would love to talk about the Audemars Piguet tradition. This is a watch that in every form that I've seen it in, minute repeater, perpetual calendar, tourbillon chronograph, is massive, and one that is, it has a very quirky sense of style. I would like to say that this is one that potentially only a mother could love, but I think I might be a mother in this case. It's so polarizing. I think I love these.
There was an ultra-thin version of that made with an old Piguet pocket watch caliber. That's definitely the one to get. This is drawn directly from an AP watch made in the first third of the 20th century. It's an extremely polarizing look. It's somewhere between a cushion case and a tonneau. You just go on my Watchbox Reviews, now 1916 Reviews channel, check out the Audemars Piguet tradition and look at that ultra-thin watch and how different it is from anything else AP makes. They've also made complications, but I've got a couple of them reviewed. I would say I see one of these watches per year. So if you're looking for exclusivity, I cannot over-recommend this. I cannot over-recommend it, and you are guaranteed to have the only one at your red bar.
Every single time, you will be the only one in the room with this watch. That's part of the quirkiness. That's part of the fun. I think, the oversized nature of it is also fun. We've gotten out of oversized watches, and this is one that wears it so purposefully. It kind of is just unapologetically itself. The movement borderline fits the case, but not in an awful way. I think the amount of material that you get, the heft overall is different, and it's a statement piece.
Yeah, it wears like a big shingle. It's the best way I could describe it. Wears like a big shingle. If you want to see again, go over and check out my reviews. In terms of other great APs that are not Royal Oaks, a piece I first encountered back at Watch You Want in 2000 and I believe this was 2015, but the Jules Audemars chronometer with AP escapement. Now, the original AP escapement was based on the Robert Robin direct impulse system invented in 1791. And the idea here was it was basically a marine chronometer style escapement that would impulse the balance once and only in its direction of travel. And there were two things you could say about it. One, it worked. In terms of precision, it worked. Two, it was very shock susceptible, and it was completely unacceptable for a wristwatch. It's also not self-starting. So Audemars Piguet spent a lot of time on this in the early to mid-2000s, and it came out in a millinery case with a relatively low beat rate of 21,600 in 2006. And it wasn't until SIHH 2009 that it really hit its stride and became what it should have been from the beginning. And that's on the reference 26153, which is part of the Jules Audemars line. 46 millimeters, but don't get scared off because it's a purposeful 46. Two huge mainspring barrels are front and center on the dial. There's a large platform escapement with twin hairsprings, and Audemars Piguet found that it worked better in a wristwatch format if it operated at a screaming high frequency. So what they settled on was 43,200 vibrations per hour or 12 beats per second. And they were able to create self-starting, unlubricated, and shock-resistant a Robert Robin escapement for a wristwatch that sounds like a sewing machine against your ear. It is incredibly manic, and it came with a full COSC chronometer timing card. So not just the certification, but the long-form card showing every position, every temperature, the delta within a 24-hour period, the actual maximum deviation that it achieved, and how it actually performed over 24 hours in each position over the 24, but also with the maximum deviation during that period. It's allowed to fluctuate as long as it's not over or under the number after 24 hours. This was the most extensive chronometer card I've ever seen in my life. And I was also pretty impressed because a lot of brands come out with stuff they bill as high technology or horlogerie or belle horlogerie, and then they're afraid to put it up against a $1,200 Tissot because it might not beat that chronometer. They put their money where the mouth was with this. It was a cool watch.
This piece is drop dead gorgeous, and to see in person is both rare and a privilege, a true privilege. So a piece like this is so outrageous, so orologically significant in the sense of just kind of reaching in a different direction for the sake of watchmaking, for the sake of doing so.
Yeah, it was a great looking watch, and it's almost like a vitrine for the movement. It's big at 46, but it's a purposeful kind of big. They managed to get somewhere between 72 and 90 hours of power reserve, despite the fact that it was a screaming high-beat escapement, and the twin hairsprings, 180 degrees out of phase, made it an even better timekeeper. It won the men's watch prize at the GPHG in 2009, and while these are not cheap, considering what you're getting, just look at any number of AP Royal Oaks that are highly sought. This is a better deal. You're getting something this is the Audemars Piguet you dream of, not the one you actually get.
This is case in point in the sense of comparing how the market reacts to non-Royal Oak Audemars, because retail on these, I mean, Tim, it's around 300,000, right?
Yeah, and I'm looking at Chrono 24 right now, and I'm seeing them for under 100 grand.
Easily.
Yeah, so I'm seeing them for around 100 in platinum, and well under 100 in rose gold.
And the rose gold with the black dial is gorgeous. It's very smart. And the platinum's no slouch either. I think the contrast on the rose to the black dial is really, really something special.
I would say the one thing I like about the platinum version is that the entire base plate of the movement on the dial side, which pretty much populates the whole dial, it's cut on a rose lathe, and it's a really nice guilloche.
It really, really is. It stands out.
Lots to love here. Again, for around $100,000, you cannot buy a more impressive looking Audemars Piguet. You can definitely buy a more expensive one. I don't think buying some platinum AP House exclusive jumbo is going to get you more watch. You'll pay more money. I don't think you'll get more watch.
Now, you hit on it when discussing that piece, but let's talk millinery.
Yeah, well, I got my favorites. What are yours?
That's actually really hard. I'm a big fan of the new hammer dial pieces. I think they're gorgeous.
I've seen my fair share of those, and I don't disagree with you. I think that they're a lot of fun. Some of them are a little bit petite, so you got to try before you buy.
That's actually part of the reason why I like it, is because it wears dressy. It wears vintage almost, despite having a bit of a, outlandish case shape and pseudo complication.
Are you speaking of the Philosophique?
Yes, I am.
Okay, so guys, if you're trying to imagine this, think a sort of like mid-size millinery case with a hammered style dial and a single articulated hand that works with a cam to physically trace the egg-shaped dial of the millinery. So it doesn't just spin in a circle, it actually tracks with the shape of the millinery dial. It's a very cool thing, a one-hand only millinery with a hammered dial and a tiny wrist-friendly size, which I appreciate.
Which the millinery in general is a little bit on the large size, but I feel like it can be worn by a wide range of wrists because the measurement it suggests Or rather, what the measurement doesn't suggest is the egg shape, the oval shape, which is horizontal on the wrist rather than across the wrist.
I should also mention that while this is considered to be almost like a lady's size today, it's also very close to the size of the original 1995 millenary, which was designed for men. So, shifting perspectives on size haven't changed the fact that that was a good size for a man in 95, and this philosophique is still a good size for a man today.
I encourage gentlemen to try it on because it's interesting. It's just a fun wear.
Yeah, we're kind of jumping all around time-wise. I know there's no sort of chronology to what we're talking about. This stuff was made at every point in time between, I guess, the 70s and the present. We're going back and forth quite a bit. I would also say that something that really struck me as the version I want of a watch I liked, back in 2019 when the Code 1159 came out, I think everyone was pretty pleased with the complications. Tourbillon, minute repeater, perpetual calendar, particularly with the perpetual calendar with its aventurine dial. There was a lot of enthusiasm and commercial interest. A lot of people were kind of waiting and seeing, whereas with that perpetual calendar, there was a fair number of people putting down money on the spot to own it. Problem for me, rose gold. I don't like rose gold. I don't like yellow gold unless it's a small or a vintage watch. So in 2022, they came out with a version of the Code 1159 perpetual calendar that kept everything I liked on the original. It kept the caliber 2120 base, doing business as caliber 5134 with the perpetual calendar. It kept the lovely blue aventurine glass dial, but Audemars Piguet offered a white gold option for 2022, and it finally became the Code 1159 perpetual calendar that I wanted, and it's a really good-looking watch. The only thing I don't love is that it does appear AP still uses rhodium-plated white gold. That's the only thing I don't love. It will scratch. It will need to be plated at some point. There is an advantage to using rhodium-plated white gold. It looks as blindingly white as platinum, but it's also a higher maintenance type of white gold. Gray gold doesn't need much, whereas this will periodically need to be recoated. What else do we have on the agenda? I've got one more. How about you?
Go for it. I'm tapped out, actually.
Okay, so important to recognize that there are two star wheels that are not the code that I really like. First of all, back in 2000, you got to realize Audemars Piguet was a young 125 years old. And I say a young because in 1955, Vacheron was 200. So Audemars Piguet was celebrating its 125th anniversary in a big way. And they didn't reach that far back in their history. They reached back to 1991 and the original star wheel, which was JLC powered. It was a JLC automatic in a platinum or yellow gold case, with a set of sapphire digital discs that told digital time. It was not just the root of their revival star wheels, it was the root of Urwerk, which came around in 1997. And partly due to the interest in Urwerk watches in the late 90s, Audemars Piguet decided to revive the star wheel for the millennium and its 125th anniversary. So there was a millenary star wheel, and it was perfect. And by perfect, I mean perfectly sized, perfectly designed. It's the millenary we should have gotten in 1995. If they had come out swinging with this model, the millenary might have taken off. Beautiful lateral time scale, blue dial, steel case, perfect size. They made 125 in steel, 50 in yellow, 75 in rose gold. And if I could just have one Audemars Piguet for the rest of my life, it would probably be this. This is an awesome watch.
It is awesome. The sapphire discs are amazing. I think the use of just natural shapes of watchmaking materials, just the click springs, for example, on the Tim, what would you call those kind of star-shaped gears immediately under the sapphire
I would
discs?
say those are quite literally the star wheels.
Thank you for that. And now I feel a little dumb. But it's just outrageous to see, and just to have the ability to see that through the sapphire discs to kind of complete the entirety of the look in general of the star wheel. It's amazing.
And yeah, I will say this, guys, you've got to maintain them. Like, you have to maintain these star wheels because there's two different ways to accomplish this wandering hours complication. The first is the way AP does it with wheels and jumper springs. And that is very sensitive to lubrication and continuous use. They like to be worn. and also maintenance. So the other problem is that if you want to do this without trouble, you do it the way Ervik did it, with Maltese Cross. And the Maltese Cross is not the traditional way to do it, but it is considerably more durable, and it's a lot less sensitive to things like maintenance, lubrication, and infrequent usage. So if you've got a star wheel, you really have to take care of it. And I could tell you that my first experience at Watch You Want back in 2014 was explaining to another dealer what was wrong with one of the Star Wheel pocket watches. So there was a Star Wheel pocket watch. It was absolutely exquisite. It was made of platinum, and it had a conventional dial on one side and then a Star Wheel calendar with a month and date on the back. And the thing wasn't, well, wheeling correctly. That's the best way to describe it. And so I had to explain to this dealer that this watch probably had sat in a safe for 24 years, or I guess at that point it was only 14, for 14 years, and it just needed to go back to Audemars Piguet. And that guy got a hell of a deal. He got it for like 20 grand. The original price was deep into six figures, so he got it for 20 grand, and I bet he probably paid 5 grand on the service, but he still came out ahead. That was a gorgeous watch. If you ever find one of those Star Wheel pocket watches, cling to it like dear life. A double-sided pocket watch with time on one side and a month date Star Wheel mechanism on the back. What a watch that was.
You know, it's strangely legible too on the reverse side. It's you can read the date at a very quick glance. That is an amazing piece.
There's a reason for that. This thing is 48 millimeters. The original Star Wheel wristwatch was 36.
That'll do it. Listen, the extra 12 will definitely help you out.
Yeah, so guys, I couldn't tell you where to find the Star Wheel pocket watch. Just keep your eyes open, and if you have an inclination and one comes up, buy it. You may not get another choice for a decade or so, because I know I haven't seen one since that first day at Watch You Want. Okay, guys, we are podcasts at the 1916company.com. Forward your questions, comments, and suggestions for show themes. Armand, where can they find us?
You can find me at It's Me Armand on Instagram, or Armand at the 1916company.com via email.
And I am Tim_Masso on Instagram. Thanks for logging on.